The plane hummed quietly as passengers settled into their seats, the soft shuffle of bags overhead mixing with the murmur of voices. I had taken my assigned spot in first class, blending in as always. My job required it. As an air marshal, I was trained to be invisible, a shadow in the crowd, just another traveler. The seat beside me, however, didn't stay quiet for long. She walked in with the air of someone who believed the world owed her a throne. Diamond-studded glasses, stiff posture, lips pursed as though even breathing the same air as others was beneath her. She stopped short the moment her eyes landed on me. I knew the type instantly. Her nose wrinkled. "Excuse me," she said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? People like you don't usually sit in first class." The cabin seemed to freeze. A few heads turned. My pulse stayed steady, my training kicking in, but a flicker of anger burned deep in my chest. She didn't know who she was speaking to. She didn't know that behind my calm eyes and quiet seat number was the authority to arrest, to protect, to end a threat before it began. I could have ignored her, could have brushed it off like the hundreds of petty insults people toss around daily. But then she leaned closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "Security must have made a mistake letting you up here." She had no idea. No idea that the man she was belittling carried a badge, a firearm, and a responsibility for every single soul on that aircraft. No idea that respect, like safety, isn't defined by the price of a ticket. This flight was about to teach her. The airport was buzzing with its usual orchestra of movement, rolling suitcases clattering across the floor, flight announcements echoing over loudspeakers, the faint aroma of coffee mixing with the tang of disinfectant. I moved through it all quietly, like a shadow, invisible by design. That was the way my job worked best. No one should notice me, and if I did my job right, no one ever would. Air marshals aren't meant to be heroes in the spotlight. We're ghosts in the crowd, tucked into window seats, sipping on bottled water, scanning faces, cataloging voices. We're trained to pick up every shift in tone, every twitch in a hand, every glance that lingers too long on a bag or a cockpit door. And on this day I was simply another passenger among hundreds. Heading west on a mid-morning flight, at the boarding gate, I kept my expression neutral, my posture relaxed. No one needed to know I carried a badge in the quiet weight of responsibility. My ticket read first class, as it often did. It wasn't luxury for me. It was strategy. From the front, I had a better view of the cabin, better access if things went south. I stepped onto the plane, greeted by the sweet but tired smile of the flight attendant at the door. "Welcome aboard," she said, scanning my ticket. I gave her a polite nod and moved toward my seat. First class was nearly empty when I arrived. Soft leather seats, extra legroom, champagne already poured for those who wanted it. It was the kind of comfort most passengers dreamed of. I slid into my seat by the window, set my small carry-on at my feet, and began the routine. Eyes up, scanning, reading the little stories people carry in their body language. The cabin filled gradually. A businessman with headphones already pressed to his ears, tapping at his laptop before he even buckled in. A young couple, hand in hand, whispering excitedly about their honeymoon. A woman with tired eyes clutching a blanket like it was armor, probably traveling for reasons she didn't want to share. All normal, all harmless. And then she arrived. Even before she spoke, she carried herself like the world was built to serve her. Her heels clicked against the aisle carpet like a declaration of authority. Her perfume thick enough to linger several steps behind her. Oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and a designer bag dangled from her arm. She paused at the first-class row, scanning the seats with a critical eye, and then her gaze landed on me. Her face changed immediately. Her lips pursed. Her head tilted just slightly, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. She adjusted her sunglasses, though there was no sun inside this cabin, and took a step closer. "This must be a mistake," she said, her voice sharp, carrying just enough volume to draw a few curious glances from other passengers. I looked up calmly, meeting her stare. "Excuse me," her perfectly manicured hand gestured at my seat. "That's mine." I pulled out my ticket, held it so she could see without handing it over. Seat to a window, her mouth tightened. "Well, clearly something went wrong. People like you don't usually sit in first class." There it was. The words hung between us, dripping with the kind of condescension that had nothing to do with seating arrangements and everything to do with me. I didn't flinch, didn't scowl, didn't rise to it. My training kept my face neutral, though deep inside, the spark of anger was real. I'd heard those words before, too many times. People like you, a phrase that told you everything about the SBU and nothing about the person it was aimed at. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said evenly. She gave a little laugh, cold and dismissive. "We'll see about that." Without waiting for a reply, she flagged down a flight attendant, who rushed over with a professional smile. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" the attendant asked. "Yes," the woman said, her voice suddenly dripping with false sweetness. "I believe this man is in the wrong seat. I'm supposed to be here." The attendant checked the boarding pass she thrust into his hand. "You're in to B, ma'am. The aisle seat, right next to him." For a moment, her face froze. Then she forced a smile, tight and brittle, and slid into the seat beside me. The air between us was thick enough to choke on. She shifted noisily, muttering about how standards have fallen and how anyone can get in here now. I said nothing, eyes forward, my breathing steady. The thing about people like her is they expect reaction, they thrive on it. My silence was my shield, but it also became her fuel as the last of the passengers boarded. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her disdain. First class is for people who've earned it, not for, well, you understand. I turned my head just enough to look her in the eyes. I understand perfectly. What I didn't say was that I had earned it not with money or luxury, but with sacrifice, with nights spent away from family, hours of training that pushed me past breaking, a responsibility so heavy most people couldn't imagine carrying it, but that wasn't something she would understand, not now. The doors closed and the captain's voice filled the cabin with the usual announcements. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to taxi down the runway. She crossed her arms, still bristling, as if sitting beside me was some personal injustice. I leaned back, eyes scanning the cabin as always. My job wasn't to win arguments or correct ignorance. My job was to protect every soul on this plane, even hers. The irony wasn't lost on me. She saw me as someone beneath her, but if danger rose, I would be the one standing between her and the unthinkable, and she had no idea. The plane climbed steadily into the sky, the hum of the engine settling into a constant rhythm. The city below shrank into a patchwork of buildings and roads, then disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. Inside the cabin, lights dimmed slightly as the crew began their service routine. Passengers adjusted pillows, unfolded newspapers, or tapped at their phones before switching them to airplane mode. Beside me, the woman was already fidgeting. She sighed loudly when the flight attendants hadn't brought drinks within the first 10 minutes. She shifted her legs, tapping her heel impatiently against the floor, and every so often her eyes slid toward me, scanning me with the same look someone might give a stranger wandering into their private club. I kept my posture relaxed, sipping from the glass of water the attendant had placed on my tray. My eyes drifted across the cabin again, 2 rows of first class, 12 passengers total, all calm or ordinary. But it wasn't the ordinary I was trained for. It was the small irregularities, the sudden bursts of aggression, the nervous movements that mattered. My attention was always layered outward toward the cabin, but never blind to the person right beside me. The first shudder came unexpectedly, a quick jolt, enough to make the cabin lights flicker and the overhead bins tremble. A few gasps sounded, followed by nervous laughter. The captain's voice came over the speaker almost immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through a patch of rough air. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect it to smooth out shortly." I buckled mine without hesitation. Beside me, the woman let out a dramatic gasp, gripping the armrest with both hands. Her knuckles turned white. "Oh my God," she said loudly, her voice rising above the quiet murmur of the cabin. "This is unacceptable. Why is it shaking like this?" "It's normal turbulence," I said calmly, keeping my voice even. "It happens on almost every flight." She whipped her head toward me, eyes wide, as if I had just told her the plane was falling from the sky. "Normal? This doesn't feel normal. They should have warned us better. We shouldn't even be flying if it's this unsafe." Her panic wasn't unusual. I'd seen passengers react far worse to bumps in the air, but her tone wasn't fear alone. It carried accusation, a need to blame someone for her discomfort. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, checking that everyone was secured. When she reached us, the woman grabbed her arm. "Do something," she snapped. "This is dangerous. And sitting me next to him is making it worse. I don't feel comfortable here." The attendant kept her professionalism, but I saw the flicker of strain in her eyes. "Ma'am, the turbulence is perfectly safe. The seatbelt sign is on for everyone's safety, and the gentleman next to you is a passenger just like you. If there's anything specific you need, I'll be happy to assist when it's safe to move about the cabin." The woman huffed, releasing her grip reluctantly. Unbelievable. Standards really are falling. The attendant gave me a brief apologetic look before moving on. I shook my head slightly to let her know it wasn't a problem. Handling difficult people was far easier for me than dealing with genuine threats. The turbulence rolled on for several minutes, the plane swaying gently, then jolting sharply. A tray rattled, a drink spilled somewhere behind us, and a child cried out before being comforted by her mother. I stayed still, watching, while the woman beside me alternated between clutching the armrest and glaring at me like my calmness was an insult to her fear. "How are you just sitting there?" she demanded finally, her voice rising again. "Don't you care that we could crash?" I met her stare. "Because I know we won't. This plane is built to handle turbulence. The pilots have done this thousands of times. Panicking won't change anything." She blinked, thrown off for a second, then leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming in the confined space. "You act like you belong here, like you know better than everyone else. But first class isn't for people who sit quietly pretending they're above it all. It's for people who've earned it." Her words struck with the same arrogance as before, but louder this time, so others could hear. I noticed a man across the aisle lower his newspaper to watch. Another passenger shook his head, annoyed by the disruption. Still, I didn't take the bait. I had faced worse hostility in far higher stakes situations. I'm just another passenger, ma'am, I said evenly. Same as you. Her laugh was sharp, humorless. Hardly the turbulence eased at last, the plane smoothing out as the captain's voice returned to reassure everyone. The seatbelt sign stayed on a little longer, then finally blinked off. A ripple of relief passed through the cabin, though the woman beside me still sat stiff, arms crossed. The attendants rolled out carts of drinks and snacks. When one reached our row, she snapped her fingers. Champagne. And quickly, please. I need something to calm my nerves after that ordeal. The attendant poured her glass with steady hands, then turned to me. Something for you, sir. Just water. Thank you, the woman snorted softly. Figures she lifted her champagne, sipping like it was proof of her superiority. I ignored her, eyes drifting once again through the cabin. For a moment, everything seemed back to normal. Passengers were chatting, attendants moving with practiced grace, the hum of engines steady. But beneath the calm tension lingered. The woman had made herself the center of attention, and I could feel the unease it stirred in those around us. It wasn't danger, not yet, but it was disruption. And in my world, disruption was often the first sign of something more. I leaned back, keeping my expression unreadable, but inside I was already preparing. Not for her insults, I could endure those all flight, but for the possibility that the peace of this cabin might not last because trouble, I knew, has a way of finding the quiet places, and on this flight, I was the one tasked with meeting it head-on. The plane had settled into its rhythm again. The seatbelt sign was off. Trays were down, and first class was buzzing with quiet conversation and the soft clinking of glasses. For most passengers, the earlier turbulence was already forgotten, but beside me, the woman still carried her discontent like armor. She scrolled angrily through her phone, muttering under her breath about cheapening experiences and unworthy company. I had learned long ago to let such words drift past me. They weren't meant to teach or to question, they were meant to wound, and wounds only have power if you let them pierce the skin. So I turned my attention outward again, scanning the cabin with my practiced eye. It was then that I noticed him, 3 rows behind. In economy, a man was growing restless. At first it was subtle, a tap of his foot, a shift of his shoulders, a glance at the overhead bin. But soon it escalated. His voice rose, carrying over the hum of the engines. "Where's my bag? You people lost it, didn't you?" he barked at the flight attendant, who was trying to soothe him with gentle tones. "I paid for priority boarding. My bag should have been right above me." The attendant explained calm as ever, that the overhead bins had been full and the bag had been checked. But the man wasn't listening. His anger wasn't about luggage. It was about control. I watched closely, every muscle in my body tuned to his movements. His agitation was infectious. A couple of passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The energy in that section of the cabin was shifting, tipping toward chaos. The woman beside me sniffed, clearly irritated by the commotion. "Honestly," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear, "first I have to sit next to you, and now this circus in economy. What is this airline coming to?" I didn't answer. My focus was on the man. He had stood now, despite the seatbelt sign flashing on again as the captain anticipated another stretch of rough air. The attendant held out a hand, urging him to sit. "Sir, please return to your seat. For your safety, I'm not sitting down," he shouted, his voice cracking like a whip across the cabin. He shoved past the attendant, stepping into the aisle with jerky, aggressive movements. "I want to see the captain." Now, that was my moment. I unbuckled smoothly, rising from my seat. The woman's eyes widened in shock. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, but I was already moving. My steps were steady, purposeful, but not rushed. Too fast, and I'd trigger panic. Too slow, and the man could escalate further. I approached him with a calm, authoritative voice that carried just enough weight to cut through his shouting. "Sir," I said firmly, "you need to return to your seat now." He spun on me, his face red with fury. "Who the hell are you?" "Another passenger. Stay out of this." That was when I reached into my jacket and produced my badge, holding it up just enough for him and those close enough to see to understand. "Federal Air Marshal," I stated. "You need to sit down immediately." The shift was instant. Gasps rippled through the nearby rows. The man blinked, taken aback, his anger colliding with sudden realization. He hesitated, torn between fight and retreat. "You can't tell me," he began, but his voice faltered under my steady gaze. "Yes, I can," I said evenly, "and I am." "Sit down." For a tense moment, the aisle was silent, except for the drone of the engines. Then, slowly, he backed down, his shoulders sagging as the fight drained out of him. He slumped into his seat, muttering curses under his breath. The attendant quickly fastened his belt and thanked me with a look of deep relief. As I turned to return to my seat, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me. Some were curious, others relieved, and a few simply stunned. That was the life of an air marshal. Most passengers never knew we were there until the moment we had to step into the light. When I sat down again, the woman beside me was staring, her champagne glass forgotten on the tray. Her lips parted slightly, but for once, no words came out. "You're," she finally whispered, "you're law enforcement?" I didn't look at her directly. "I'm here to keep everyone safe. That includes you." Her face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. The arrogance she had worn like a crown since boarding seemed to falter, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. But, she stammered, I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, I said, my voice calm, not unkind. That's the point. She leaned back slowly, her eyes fixed on me as though seeing me for the first time. For the rest of the cabin, life moved on. The attendants resumed their service. Conversations picked up again, though quieter, more subdued. But between us, the silence was heavy with unspoken words. For the first time since she sat down, she didn't fidget, she didn't complain, she didn't mutter insults under her breath. Instead, she folded her hands neatly on her lap and stared straight ahead, lost in thought. I knew that silence well. It was the sound of someone reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the person sitting beside them. And in that silence, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. People often see the uniform or the badge and make assumptions: power, authority, control. But the truth is simpler. My job isn't about being above anyone. It's about being willing to step forward when danger comes, even if no one thanks you for it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very woman who had declared, "People like you didn't belong in first class," was now seated beside the reason every passenger on that plane could travel safely that she didn't. Speak again for the rest of the meal service. And for the first time since we'd taken off, I felt the weight of her disdain lift, replaced by something I hadn't expected from her at all: respect, even if she'd never admit it out loud. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane pushed deeper into its journey, the hum of the engines steady and familiar. Dinner service was winding down, trays cleared away, and passengers had settled into their small routines, reading, dozing, or watching the glowing screens in front of them. To anyone else it was an ordinary flight again. But beside me, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The woman who had strutted onto the plane with diamonds and disdain now sat with her hands folded in her lap, silent for the first time. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't sighing dramatically. She wasn't muttering under her breath. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on the darkened cabin wall ahead. It was the silence of someone whose carefully built armor had cracked. I leaned back into my seat, my own posture as neutral as ever. But I could feel her glance toward me, then quickly away. She was wrestling with something. I'd seen that look countless times before, not in first-class cabins, but in interrogation rooms, in moments when pride collided with reality. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than I expected. "You really are an air marshal?" "Yes," I said simply. She swallowed hard, as though testing the weight of her next words. She hesitated, then gave a nervous laugh, brittle and self-mocking. "I treated you like garbage." I didn't answer immediately. It wasn't my job to hand out judgment for personal insults. My duty was larger than her opinions, and I had long since learned not to carry resentment into the work. Still, I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. "You treated me the way you thought you could," I said evenly. "But now you see me differently." Her cheeks flushed. "I didn't realize. I just thought." She faltered again, then sighed, deflating a little in her seat. "God, I sound awful." I didn't reply with comfort. People don't learn from having their mistakes erased for them. Instead, I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit with it, and slowly, she filled it herself. "My ex-husband used to fly first class all the time," she said suddenly, her voice carrying a sharp edge of bitterness. "Always made sure everyone knew he was important. And when I got this ticket, I thought I deserved to feel like that too. Untouchable, better than everyone else." There it was, the mask slipping, the truth emerging beneath the cruelty. I listened without interruption, my eyes steady on hers. "But seeing you," she shook her head, a faint, humorless smile tugging at her lips. "You weren't showing off. You weren't bragging. You were just sitting there, calm as anything, while I made a fool of myself." And then she exhaled, shaking her head again. "You saved the entire cabin from that man. You didn't even blink." "It's my job," I said quietly. "Exactly," she replied. "That's the difference. You're actually important." Her voice trailed off, then returned in a whisper. "I'm just loud." Something inside me softened. Then, I had dealt with arrogance, cruelty, even hatred before. But this wasn't hatred. It was insecurity dressed up in pearls and perfume. She wasn't as strong as she wanted the world to believe. "Everyone on this plane is important," I said finally. "The businessman, the mother with her child, the honeymoon couple. My job is to protect all of you the same way. Your seat doesn't change that." Her eyes glistened in the dim light, and she looked away quickly, pretending to adjust the hem of her sleeve. For the first time, she had no sharp retort, no smug remark, only silence and the weight of her own reflection. After a long pause, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Two simple words, but heavy. They hung in the air, trembling with sincerity. I gave her a small nod. "Thank you." The engines droned on, the cabin peaceful again. She leaned back in her seat, but this time not with her nose in the air. She looked human, tired, almost fragile. Minutes passed before she spoke again, softer now, as though the walls she'd built were gone. "Do you ever get scared, sitting here waiting for something bad to happen?" The question caught me off guard, not because of its content, but because of who asked it. I turned it over in my mind before answering. "Yes," I admitted. Every flight has that possibility. Every passenger could be a risk. Fear is natural, but training teaches us what to do with it. She studied me carefully, and when that man stood up earlier, you weren't afraid. I was ready, I said. That's different. She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Then, almost shyly, she whispered, I wish I could be like that strong, steady you can. I said, strength isn't about shouting the loudest or acting untouchable. It's about staying calm when others can't. You showed strength just now by admitting you were wrong. Most people can't do that. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It wasn't forced, wasn't smug. It was small, genuine, and tinged with humility. For the rest of the flight, she didn't return to her old habits. She didn't roll her eyes at the attendants, didn't huff impatiently, didn't mutter insults under her breath. Instead, she sat quietly, occasionally glancing at me with something closer to respect than resentment. At one point, as the lights dimmed further for the night portion of the flight, she leaned slightly toward me. I know I don't deserve it after the way I acted, but thank you for keeping us safe. I gave her a short nod, nothing more. But inside I felt the faintest spark of satisfaction, not because she had apologized, but because she had seen. That was enough, and for the first time since the flight began, the silence between us wasn't heavy with judgment. It was peaceful. The cabin stirred awake as the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Los Angeles. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign echoed through the plane, followed by the subtle shift in pitch as the engines throttled down. Outside the window, the endless stretch of clouds broke open to reveal a sprawling city, twinkling in the early evening light. The descent was smooth, the kind of landing passengers barely remembered once their feet touched the ground. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere carried the quiet weight of everything that had already happened. The disruptive man in economy had been monitored carefully by the crew and me since his outburst. He sat slumped in his seat now, subdued and silent, a shadow of the storm he'd tried to unleash. Most passengers, relieved and distracted by the thought of home, had returned to normalcy, but not the woman beside me. She hadn't said much since her apology in the dim light of the flight, yet the arrogance she had worn like a mask when she first boarded was gone. Her shoulders no longer squared like a throne, her lips no longer curled with disdain. Instead, she sat quietly, her eyes flickering now and then toward me, as though still trying to reconcile who I was with, who she had assumed me to be. As the wheels lowered and the city lights glowed brighter beneath us, she finally spoke. I don't usually apologize, she said softly, almost as if confessing, but I wasn't just rude earlier. I was wrong, completely wrong, about you, about a lot of things. I glanced at her, then back toward the window. It happens. Her laugh was quiet. Not like this. I've spent too much time judging people by the wrong things. Clothes, seats, appearances. I didn't even stop to think about the kind of person you might actually be. She paused, then added, and you didn't even snap back at me. Not once. You just stayed calm. I don't think I've ever met anyone who could do that. I let her words settle. There was sincerity in her tone now, stripped of the earlier arrogance. She wasn't fishing for forgiveness. She was admitting something real. Something that had been building inside her since I showed my badge. My job isn't about proving myself to anyone, I said quietly. It's about making sure everyone gets home safely. That includes the people who doubt me, even the people who insult me. Her eyes softened. That's bigger than anything I've ever done. The plane jolted gently as the wheels kissed the runway. A ripple of relief swept through the cabin as the engines roared, slowing us down, guiding us safely to the terminal. Some passengers clapped softly, a tradition more common overseas but still sometimes heard after tense flights. Others leaned forward, eager to be off the plane and into their waiting lives. The woman sat still, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Respect, yes, but also something like regret. When we reached the gate and the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers immediately rose, pulling bags from overhead compartments, shuffling into the aisle. The energy of arrival replaced the earlier tension, but she didn't move. Instead, she turned to me one last time. You don't have to say anything back, but thank you. Not just for stopping that man, for showing me what strength actually looks like. I'll remember it. I met her gaze briefly, then gave a single nod. That's enough. She smiled, small and genuine, then stood to collect her bag. Her movements were quieter now, less demanding. She didn't push ahead of anyone, didn't sigh impatiently as the line to exit slowed. She simply waited, like everyone else. I stayed seated until most passengers had cleared, as I always did, watching the aisle, ensuring the cabin remained calm to the end. When she finally stepped off the plane, she glanced back once, as though to confirm I was still there. Our eyes met for a second, then she disappeared into the stream of people spilling into the terminal, and just like that, she was gone, one of countless faces I'd encounter in the quiet duty of my work. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had boarded the plane believing she was above me, above everyone else. She left it having glimpsed something deeper, something truer, not because of anything I said, but because of what she saw when the moment demanded it. That was enough for me as I gathered my things and prepared to leave. I reflected, not for the first time, on the strange balance of my job. Most flights were silent victories, threats prevented before they happened. Passengers who never even knew I was there. Tonight had been different. Tonight, the truth had stepped into the light. And though the woman's words would fade into memory, her transformation was proof of something I believed deeply. Respect can't be demanded by status or bought with a ticket. It's earned through action, through calm in chaos, through quiet strength when the world expects noise. As I walked off the plane and into the terminal, blending once more into the crowd, I carried no bitterness for her insults, no pride in her apology, just the steady certainty that I had done my job, and for me, that was enough.